Hello, hello, hello. Today we're going to be covering the second carnivorous Wailing E.G.O, and that belongs to none other than Hong Lu. This carnivorous Wailing E.G.O is a 10th level. It has 18 base plus a roll, blunt damage, and attack weight of 3. If the target has Tremor, deal 5 plus the sum of potency plus count on target divided by 2% more damage. This can go to a maximum of 30%. Pretty good. If you have highest resonance, and if that's 4 or more, deal 7 plus 0.5 plus the sum of tremor potency and tremor count on target divided by 1.5% more damage, maximum of 40. So it makes it a little bit more easier to do damage and raises the cap a little bit, so it's pretty darn good, I would say. On hit, inflict 3 tremor count and 3 tremor potency, decent. On hit, trigger tremor amplitude into tremor reverb. Now I'll cover that in a minute. And on hit, trigger tremor burst, then reduce the tremor count by 1. So pretty good, I would have to say. But what is tremor reverb, right? It's a new type of tremor, and what it does is when the tremor is bursted, they take sloth damage equal to the tremor potency, which is pretty good, I would say, right? It does more damage, it does some sloth damage on them, which makes sense. This E.G.O is a sloth affinity, right? So, pretty interesting, I'd have to say. The passive of this E.G.O is called Gloominess. When this unit triggers a tremor burst, you inflict 1 offense slowdown and 2 defense slowdown on the enemy next turn. Pretty darn good. Now, up to 3 times per turn, including E.G.O skills, they count on this too, so this is not bad. Best case scenario, if you get all the 3 times, then you're going to be doing 3 offense level down and 6 defense level down next turn, which I would have to say is pretty decent. But what isn't decent is the amount you're going to have to spend to use it, right? 20 sanity, that's the average, right? But, oh my goodness, 3 sloth, 3 gloom, and 2 pride. My goodness, even if there wasn't pride, that would be average for Teth, right? 6 is already a decent amount, but 6 is already a decent amount, but 8 is, oh my goodness, 8 is way too much for what it's worth. Although, I can't really say that because tremor reverb is such a solid thing. It just deals more damage. It also does reduce their stagger and stuff. It does stagger them, but it also does damage. So I would say actually it is pretty worth the cost. And it's not an E.G.O you want to be spamming. It's an E.G.O you want to just use once or twice, right? And when you use the E.G.O, you're gonna have your resistance change to fatal to lust, ineffective to sloth, and fatal to envy. So pretty bad, but pretty mediocre resistances, I guess. Could be worse, could be better. Same old shtick. If you decide to corrode this E.G.O, which you probably should, it's pretty good corrosion. You'll get a roll of 26 with a negative 8 coin, blunt damage, and attack weight of 3. If the target has tremor, deal 5 plus the sum of the potency and count of tremor on target divided by 2% more damage to a maximum of 40%, which is pretty good, same as it was before, but it's still pretty good. But at 4, the highest resonance, if it's 4 or above, then you deal 7.5 plus the amount of potency and count of tremor divided by 1.5% more damage to a maximum of 50. That's pretty good. But what else is pretty good is also you're on hit, because on hit you inflict 6 tremor potency and 6 tremor count. Pretty darn good amount of tremor. You also trigger tremor conversion, you turn it to tremor reverb, which is a good tremor. On do you trigger tremor burst, then reduce the count by 1. You do it again, then you reduce the count by 1. So you're putting a lot of tremor on, you're making the tremor even better, and you're popping it a couple times, right? A little bit heavy on the tremor destroyingness. You burst it and then you lower the count, you burst it and you lower the count again, but still pretty good. On to the drip of this E.G.O, and I gotta say it's quite good. The Awakening is nothing insane, nothing out of this world, but it is good and I like it. Kind of reminds me of Damien a little bit with the black and the blue. I mean, that makes sense why Sinclair was included in these 2 E.G.Os. I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But the corrosion, I like it quite a bit. He's starting to turn into the frog. He got a leg, an arm, turned into a frog. He got an eye on his head, dripping tears, dripping sludge, whatever it is. It still looks great, so I'd have to say 7. 7's pretty good. Now, for strength, I'd have to say this E.G.O is also pretty high up there. You don't have the best roll in the Awakening. You have a decent roll in the corrosion, though. Although, you do more damage on the Awakening, right? You're going to be doing an extra 40% damage on the Awakening, and on the corrosion, an extra 50% more damage. And on the corrosion and the Awakening, you're inflicting more tremor, which doesn't sound like much, but you're turning that tremor into pure damage and tremorness, but you're also turning it into damage with the reverb. The reverb is so good for damage, I'd have to tell you. And if they're weak or fatal to Sloth, by golly, this is going to be a phenomenal way to deal damage. So, I gotta say, 10. Just easy 10. Makes your tremor deal more damage, and just a decent E.G.O in general, so pretty darn good for a 10. And for the usefulness of this E.G.O, I'd have to tell you, getting a new type of tremor, dealing more damage, inflicting a bunch of tremor, and the corrosion inflicts a lot of tremor. It bursts quite a bit of tremor, but it also got a decent passive. The only worst thing about it is the cost of it, so that's going to boost it down a little bit. So, usefulness of this E.G.O, I'd have to give you a solid, 8. It can't be 9, because it's just how expensive it is, and it can't be 10, because 10's for the highest echelon. So, 8. 8.5. 8.5 is probably pretty good. But, that's about it for this E.G.O, although I'm kind of confused as to why this E.G.O is a Sloth skill instead of a Gloom, like Sinclair's. I get it. The Tremor Reverb is a Sloth damage dealing thing, but still, it makes sense because you can't have a Gloom damage dealing thing that's already exists with Sinking. Although, that's probably the only reason, because this would fit Sloth a little bit better, but I digress. Still good E.G.O anyways, but hope you have a good one, and peace.